Let me know. All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our grant writing in the age of AI discussion. We are hoping that this will be a discussion, so you're welcome to, put topics in the chat that you want to discuss, or if you have any specific questions, things like that. Also, welcome to unmute and join in as you see fit. Um, Quick little introductions. Fielding, you want to start us out?
Sure. So my name is Fielding Jezreel. I have been grant writing since about 2012, either as an in-house writer or as a consultant for the last almost decade. January was made a big difference in what my 2025 was going to look like. I work almost exclusively in federal grants. Was kind of curious about AI and then ended up with a lot of time on my hands in the early part of this year and needed to figure out how I'm going to spend my time and felt like AI might be a space where there was a lot to navigate and learn, and I enjoy being on sort of the cutting edge of things. And so that is what has led me here. I attempt to stay sort of at the edge of what's happening in AI and apply it to the grants world. And Melody and I have had some really fun conversations, and we just decided to make those conversations public, and then invite others to come in and think through these issues with us.
Yeah, and I'm Melody Hernandez. I'm a grant consultant as well. I am not a big fan of using AI, and am a very reluctant AI user when I do have to use it. I think that there's a lot of issues with AI that give me pause as to if it even has a place in grant work currently. And I'm also very concerned about, several different things about it from an environmental standpoint, from a bias standpoint, from access standpoint, all kinds of things. So definitely have a lot of discussions with Fielding along that. Outside of, my reluctant use of AI, my consulting practice mainly focuses on helping folks get less dependent on government funding. So 2025 has been my year of I told you so, because, a lot of folks unfortunately have become a little overly reliant upon government funding in a way that isn't necessarily the most sustainable way to run, any business and a nonprofit business specifically. So definitely helping a lot of folks navigate through these difficult times from that front. But the impetus of all these conversations about AI with Fielding was me, her and I having just a phone call, virtual coffee check-in, and me just going off about a very specific situation where AI was used by a funder in a way that I felt hurt the entire process, and that kind of resulted in Fielding asking me to write a blog post for and then her kind of pointing out a lot of the things in the blog post that she felt like maybe she didn't agree with me about, and so we decided to have these discussions to talk about those disagreements, because I think they're important to talk about, even if we don't ultimately end up deciding to agree. They're topics that are worth keeping on our radar as we move forward as a grant profession into using AI more and more and more. It seems like each week that goes by, it seems like AI is being used more than it was the week before. So yeah, if anyone has anything specific, they're welcome to put it in the chat or unmute.
We'd
Otherwise,
love to invite you and everyone can drop ideas into chat and then Melody and I can sort of arrange or curate a conversation that kind of weaves in the topics and questions folks have. And I think while you all are thinking through what you might want to drop in the chat, I have to share, Melody, that I think I've come up with one key thing that we can both agree with,
oh,
which is I think we would both rather put AI back in a bottle. I think I am squarely in the I wish this had never happened camp. And I'm still going to use it. And I'm going to still teach people how to use it, but I think humanity would be better off if we stuck it back in a bottle. And I think you might agree with me.
I'm surprised to hear that. I feel like that
I
is that a
know.
new perspective on your part from prior.
I think I've always felt like it's here and at least once I started engaging with it, and I admit I was a bit of a late adopter. I really didn't get deep into this until January of this year. I think to me it looked like this is another internet, right? Like we assume everyone's on the internet now, right? And so we're not like, ooh, this company has an internet product, right? And I think in 5 years, AI is going to be in every software we can possibly imagine. And so I don't think there's any going back, and I want to understand it and I want to apply it in ways that feel good for me and my clients and grapple with what is going to happen, right? Similar to the internet, like it changed the way that we do business, all of us, right? And I think the same thing is happening here. So, and I'm not sure, if we could put social media back in a bottle, I would do that as well. I don't think the net benefit for the world is positive for social media. Does it do a lot of cool things? Yes. Has it also dramatically risen rates of depression and loneliness and seclusion? Yes. And I don't know that it's worth it. And so I think there are things that I think I'm extremely oh, what's the word? I'm utilitarian. I think it's here. I think it's here to stay, and I want to understand how to use it. Um, but I don't think I've seen a use case yet that um, where the benefit actually overrides the net harm.
Mind blown, Fielding. This is just does not sound like the Fielding I know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of my stance too on it, right? It's not that I never use it. I don't like using it. I don't want it. I'm really annoyed with it being shoved down my throat. I feel like I want to consent to the use of AI with even things like summing up my emails. It's not helpful. I don't want that. Um, and and then also, yeah, feeling like I can already see harm that is done by AI. And especially affecting, I work with a lot of really small organizations. I think the biggest org I work with is 7 million a year, and that's way bigger than most of my other clients, right? And a lot of my clients are under 1 million. Some of my clients are under 250,000, so they are, I feel like, the ones that are maybe quicker to use AI because they have fewer resources, and also maybe on the wrong side of the digital divide, where when they use it, they don't always have access to resources that help them learn how to use it well. And I think we can try to address that, but I think I just see AI as increasing social inequity. And that's something that I spent my entire career trying to decrease. Um, I see we have a couple things going on in the chat. There's a request that, Fielding, you tell us about your effective use cases. Audra also asked if it said, I'm curious about the net harm you see. I think the big one is environmental, but curious about others.
Melody, let's start with some of the harm because I think you have some really incredible stories. And I would just start by saying one of the potential harms that I see, one that I'm really, really concerned about, is training the next generation of grant writers.
Yeah.
There is no other way to learn to construct an argument than to practice constructing an argument. And I worry that the entry level grant jobs will no longer require someone to know how to write. And I think the ability to write is the ability to logic. And I have trouble trying to separate out the ability to develop super strong programs and think through something like a logic model if we don't also have a great handle on building an argument. So I'm really concerned that, and we already see it, right? There are companies out there who claim that you will pay $1,500 and they will write a federal grant for you. They're using AI. They're not pretending. They're like, our AI will write your federal grant for you for $1,500. I don't believe it works, number one. But number two, what is lost in a process where people do not talk about what they want to do, and instead we hand the reins over to an AI to develop a grant submission that includes program details and people's job descriptions, right? I mean, there's so much detail that goes into particularly a federal grant, but any grant that is the work of multiple people coming together and having conversations. And if we, I like AI as a tool, and I can answer Kelly's question of like, how am I actually using this? But it is a tool that I drive. My clients are still involved in the process. I'm still involved in the process. I still bring what I call my business degree in liberal arts and in nonprofits to the table. I have program planning and evaluation and budgeting experience that I bring and can facilitate conversations. And if those conversations aren't actually happening, we hand that over to AI. Now we have program folks who are delivering something developed by non-humans. And it all starts to look the same. And we lose out on all of the creativity that comes about when two people sit in a space together and really try to figure things out. And so I worry about that loss, not the loss that I think what grant professionals do is incredibly important. And it is not necessarily the literal writing that is important. But when we turn over the entire process, which is what this particular tool says it will do, right? It's just going to make up this federal grant for you. Okay, so you get the money, but then what? Is the program actually optimized for the people that you serve? Did you talk to anyone about what was in that AI grant, or were you like, "Wow, this looks great," and you just submit it? Like what are we doing when we hand over the reins? So I think
And
that honestly is like my biggest fear.
And I would push back that I don't even know that you would get it, right? So I have some folks who are sitting on I know some folks who recently were on a review panel for a state grant here, that one of the questions was just if you have a strategic plan, to send them your strategic plan. If you don't have a strategic plan, please give us 3 to 5 strategic goals over the next, how many years. And hundreds of folks applied to this, and some of the review panelists have said that it was very clear that some of the responses were written by AI and were virtually identical to each other. And so, like, how do you, when you don't give it the information, which that's part of being on the wrong side of the digital divide too, right? If you have a paid version that has access to all of your information, it won't spit out. And I've seen it both ways. I have a client who has, the paid GPTs that are preloaded with my winning grants that I've written them over the last 8 years that I've written grants for them, right? And some of the other grants they have, and it's all preloaded with that language. And when we feed it a prompt, it is pulling from it's using the voice that we've created for grants. It's pulling from those specific things. When you just go to ChatGPT free version and you feed it a prompt, like give us a strategic plan. We're an arts org, give us a strategic plan with 3 to 5 strategic goals, blah, 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 and feed it the question from the funder. It's just going to give you generic information. And that information, it's not wrong. It's just not, it's going to be identical to everybody else's. So when you have all these identical ones, what's going to rise above all that noise of identical ones? It might not even be a better written answer. It'll just be one that's different, right? So like that could be if you have a lot of folks who are taking up these $1,500 offers, a lot of them are going to end up with virtually identical proposals that, it's going to create the review criteria to be looked at through a different lens as well. And so, yeah, so I mean, I don't know that they would necessarily win the funding if they're submitting a proposal that's identical. Also, it reminded me of what you were talking about. It sounds good, right? It all sounds good. I had a client who brought me, oh, look at this. Somebody, I told them what I wanted to do and they wrote up this whole thing for me and it's so beautiful. My goals for the next, year or whatever it was, my programmatic goals. And it was an arts org and they showed it to me. I said, okay, yeah, this looks great. I mean, I could tell right away it was written by AI. I don't know that this woman, she was a little older than I am. I don't know that she quite, recognized it as AI written. So I screen shared with her and I said, okay, yeah, this sounds great. Let's go through these one by one because I just want to like make sure I have all the right details. So I read goal number one and she's nodding. Yeah, that sounds great. I said, okay, let's think about what that actually means, right? So this is saying that you're expanding staff. So we're talking staff here. You're planning on hiring more people and putting them on the payroll over the next year? She's like, oh, no, I'm not planning on doing that. Okay, well, that's what this goal is. Is it that you're looking to work with more contract workers? Is it looking that you're trying to get more teaching artists? Like what specifically? Because it's like the way these were worded sounded good, but they weren't actually things she wanted to do. And out of those, I don't know if it was 4 or 5 different goals and each one had 4 or 5 different activities, we probably changed 80% of them because they weren't actually things she wanted to do, but they sounded good and they were close enough to the things she wanted to do that it wasn't until we really like it is work. It was an hour-long phone call for us to really like interpret what was being said and to compare that to the goals that she really had for her nonprofit in order to realize that it actually wasn't at all what she wanted to do. But it takes more work, right? If to your point, like if a newbie grant writer writes something and it's kind of maybe not written the best and it's a little easier to recognize, right? That there's problems there. AI always looks so good and sounds so good, and you have to really put on like a hypercritical thinking cap to really tease out, is it what's being said even correct? Is it even true to what we want to do? And, is it telling me or am I telling it? Right?
And I almost hesitate to open this can of worms, but I know you'll also like this train of thought, which is if a funder is asking for something like a strategic plan or a logic model, and you don't have one yet, there's two options. One is you create garbage and you submit garbage and you don't care because you're never going to use it again. Or number two, you use it as a capacity building exercise and you actually use the thing you create. But honestly, that's the wrong direction in the first place, right? We should have logic models because logic models are helpful. And then when a funder asks for it, we just give it. But when we are making up logic models in ChatGPT, guess how useful that is? Zero, right? And so I think there's also this, I think there's this moment where funders can actually take a look and say, okay, these 6 questions, we are getting, carbon copies of the same answers from everyone, which means maybe it's a stupid question in the first place, right? Because we don't have it. We can be asked 100 times what our sustainability plan is, but you better believe everybody's sustainability plan is we're going to diversify our revenue. Do we care anymore? Do we have to keep asking these questions? And so, part of the pushback is also if you require organizations to have a strategic plan, just have an upload button or a checkbox that says, no, we don't have it. Instead of creating fake, creating work under the guise of this is, I think funders think this is going to be useful. Even if they create it, it's useful. It's like it's never going to be useful if we're just plugging in prompts into ChatGPT. So if you are a funder and you want everyone to have strategic plans, then pay for those strategic plans to be created.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, and because, I always say my big thing is like the grant process, when done correctly, improves the impacts and outcomes of your program, right? It makes a better
Absolutely.
impact in the community when you go through the grant process and you do it correctly. And that's my frustration with AI. It is taking things that were meant to say, hey, like a lot of funders ask about a sustainability plan because guess what? A lot of a lot of the programs they funded and the organizations they funded have closed. They've been like, you're doing great work and we lost you. We lost you because you didn't think through, or they've had to fire amazing staff because they didn't think through sustainability, right? Think through it. It's not just having the answer that gets you the money, it's actually having a plan, right?
Yeah.
Actually having a plan that's going to work for you to make sure that you're not having to close programs and adversely affect the community. You're not having to fire your staff at the end of that 1 year grant period because that hurts the community and, in more than one ways, programs are impacted and industry is adversely impacted because don't like to get nonprofit jobs when they're like, oh, I might not have a job after a year, right? Like there's just a lot of negative that comes out of that. So it's like that's the point of the question. And if the point of the question is to really get you to have these plans and think through things, then just feeding it into ChatGPT, barely reading it and cutting and pasting it in is not going to help make sure that org's around 3 years later. It's not going to make sure that impacts are happening stronger and better in the community. And again, that is the whole point. But, a lot of these funders these days, I feel like it's gotten worse and worse and worse since COVID of quicker and quicker and quicker turnarounds on these grants. And there's not time to do these things that you would need to do because you're having to, read through their hundreds of pages of RFPs and NOFOs and things that were written by Chat GPT that are hard to understand and sometimes contradictory. And, I feel like there's just so many things even like that are making it so much harder for folks to do this work well. The work of grant work, which is again designed to try to make better impacts in the community through the process. I have seen another interesting, and I do want to have time. Um, yeah, that's very true that RFPs were, I see Kelly saying RFPs were often poorly written before AI too. But but a human can only write so fast and AI can just dump more and more and more. Guys, you're buried under that just happened with this, recent one that I was complaining to Fielding about. So I spent a lot of time talking about that on our last call. I don't want to spend too much more on this one, but part of the issue with that was that they disclosed that they did use AI to write the RFP, and that RFP had also several supplemental components of it, and each of them were like hundreds of pages long because it just spat out so much information. So folks were then feeding it into ChatGPTs to summarize it and finding inconsistencies that were rampant among it because of them just, putting out like too much content too quickly, which that part didn't really happen as much with people. There also was like a weird reluctance of them to admit. Usually there's that process of, oh, we corrected the RFP, right? They almost like didn't want to admit it because I think like people kind of feel like the computers must have not made a mistake, right? Like, so there's this like weird thing with AI of like, kind of almost standing by it more like you acknowledge that humans make mistakes and then you correct them, but there's almost like a weird reluctance to acknowledge that an AI made a mistake and to then correct it, at least as of right now. But I also want to get to Kelly's other comment about the effective use case studies. And Emily also says, curious about y'all's thoughts around ethical use of AI. At my nonprofit, it is being integrated and especially in our youth programs because it's becoming clear it is a technical skill and the need for success in the future, but also live and work in Memphis, which is actively being harmed by AI. What are y'all's thoughts on how we can ethically and effectively use AI? And I'm curious, Emily, if you mean like your programs are teaching young people how to use AI as like a job skill? Is that what I'm getting out of this? Or am I misunderstanding that component of it?
So like sort of in a way, because we work with high schoolers and young adults who want to work in the arts industry. So they have internships at various places and a lot of these parts of their internships. And they also learn how to produce music and make music. So just as a result of all the things they're learning from practicing artists, AI is being introduced as a skill they need.
Yeah.
So, here's where I've landed, and I don't think it's a perfect answer. But I think Kelly made a comment that I think sums it up well, which is there are a lot of issues that have been exacerbated by AI, and they're not caused by AI. And I would say environmental injustice is one of those issues. So the same communities that are being impacted by AI data centers are the same communities where we dumped radioactive waste. They're the same communities that we built highways through. They're the same, right? These are communities that often do not have political power. They are often communities that are economically disadvantaged. They're communities that have been disinvested in over time. And sometimes these types of projects are billed as investment, right? But at a very high environmental cost and a very high people cost. And so I don't want to overshadow that is very real, right? And I think to Kelly's point, this is not new. And it reinforces the reasons why we need to be so involved in policy because there could be policies that protect communities. That is possible. And so what are the government systems, government policies, community practices, advocacy efforts that are needed to power change in a way that protects communities that have already borne a very high burden. I will also say that my AI usage, my direct AI usage that is chosen, and this goes back to something Melody just said about wanting to be in control of when she's using it. My direct AI usage, meaning I log into an LLM and I ask it to do something. I suspect the burden of that is microscopic compared to the AI that I use unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I turn on my TV, I am automatically using AI because it's trying to find the next thing that it wants me to watch. I am not asking Netflix to do that. And in fact, I would rather it didn't. I don't need that from Netflix. And so there's a lot of use cases where AI feels really useless, including email summaries. I don't need a summary in my Gmail. I don't want it. I turn it off, I get rid of it, and somehow it finds its way back in. And I don't want it. I don't need AI search results at the top of Google, right? So we can make individual choices about how and why we are using things, but at the end of the day, I suspect that our individual use is much heavier just because we are using software in everything we do now. And I can't turn it off in most cases.
Yeah. This is my example of that. Is I got this email on the left is my Apple iMail summary of the email on the right that was sent. It was below is FYI to keep you in the loop. And the summary was something was said. How is that more helpful than just telling me it's not really hardly even any shorter? It is definitely not more helpful. I want to turn this off. This iMail AI summary is the worst AI that I encounter that is being forced down my throat that I don't want. And I think it's worse than the Gmail ones, and you can't even turn it off. I think Gmail at least lets you pretend like you can, or it works for a short amount of time. But with iMail, apparently, there's just absolutely no way to turn it off. And it used to just show me the first half a sentence or whatever of the email, which was much more helpful. There's also been situations where it's actually told me 100% false information, like meeting has been canceled. And when you open the email, it says, hey, just checking to make sure we're still on for two. Now, had I trusted that AI, I would have thought maybe I would have been, oh, meeting's canceled. I don't need to go, right? And made other plans or something. So like, what's the point of it? What's the point of it if it's not, if we don't want it, it's not helpful. And, there's no way to turn it off. And it's actively, this is like a very minor example of how it's actively harming. But like, this is an example of like, it's not like the prior system was broken and now you've broken it, right? So like that's more frustrating to me. It's one thing when it's like amplifying, what you were talking about, like amplifying existing problems. This wasn't a problem. It wasn't broken and you broke it with your AI. So why? Those are the times that I get really frustrated. But yeah, I mean, as far as like ethics about this too, I think education and information is important. I know there's a lot of really great resources out there for ethical use of AI within the arts, especially because that is one of the areas where it is actively causing a lot of harm by stealing, things from artists and things like that. And I know that there's a lot of like, even like if you're trying to do like Photoshop kind of stuff, there's a lot of AI embedded in that now that, I don't know if it's capable of being turned off. So a lot of this is going to be something that I think the young people in your program are going to have to encounter. So I think it's about information. It's about, keeping folks aware. Because I think with young people, for those of us who are a little older, it's like we actively remember a pre-AI form of life. But, with each passing month and year, these kids are just they barely remember a time without it. It's so embedded in their daily life that, we might need to be more overt in how we point out because this thing that is a part of your daily life, sometimes you don't always recognize the harm. I think it's easier to recognize the harm when you've seen a world without it and seen a world with it. So for young people, I think it is about helping them recognize some of the things that, might be things that they're going to want to consider as they progress down this career path. The other thing I think to think about with young people and AI is that I guess there was a recent study, I think it was the University of Washington or University of Oregon, something in the Pacific Northwest, where they actually did a study with a bunch of college students who were writing papers, had them write papers using ChatGPT for a certain amount of time, then had them go back to writing papers without using AI, and their writing skills had gone down significantly in a very short time of just using, AI consistently for, I think it was just a few weeks. So it is important to recognize that for young people, as they're honing skills, they will lose those skills really quickly if they're becoming overly reliant, or they'll never gain that skill of how to, do writing or research or different art forms if you're always having AI do it. Uh, and I think that's another thing to kind of be mindful of. If it's a skill that they need to have, that it's important that they have, like communication, maybe don't be overly reliant on using AI for all of your communication. Yeah, and I see Kelly has a lot of thoughts about that too. Has anyone tried any AI writing software designed for grant writers? I've tried several. The one I liked was too expensive. They were designed to speed up the process, not to write the grants. And then also I agree the need to teach young people to write without AI tools to develop the critical thinking and analysis skills. Yeah. So has anyone used specific AI writing tools, or like AI for the whole part of the grant process, from like prospecting? I have to say, prospecting, it's horrible. It is not good it always tells you, every funder out there who's ever
Yeah.
great fit,
Well,
it's a great fit very confidently.
well, here's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, we also need to also talk about like it's AI versus machine learning. Like, so for example, and I don't even, this isn't even machine learning, but I use a software that does data visualization of 990s, and I find it incredibly useful. But I'm still doing a lot of it, I'm still doing a lot of combing through, and it's pulling by like NTE codes, so it's by those keywords and those codes. So it's still and geography, but it's basic. It's still very basic criteria. It still requires a lot of human time, but it certainly allows my tracking to be better, but that's not, AI. But I have tried a couple different pieces of software that really just organize the information better and allowed you to grab snippets. I'll try to remember the environmental one. That one was really geared more for multi-million dollar grants with the infrastructure bill, and their price point was something like, I did a trial of it, but it was something like $40,000 a year. And so I was like, yeah, no, which makes sense if you're a very, very large company going after infrastructure grants. You know what I mean? Like
But only if it actually works.
right, right. And she was really, the person running is really dedicated to making it work. I didn't have enough use cases because I spend 80% of my time, like many of us do. Grant writing is a misnomer, right? Someone's like, oh, you're the grant writer. But what do you really do? You do research, you do prospecting, you walk them through the program planning, maybe 80% of it or 20% of it, or you're helping them saying, okay, well, we need some of this strategy or we need a budget. You don't have it. It's due this week. I'm drafting it. So I don't spend enough time, um, actually, like we don't spend very much time writing. And I think that's actually a fascinating thing because if you don't know what grant writing is, you probably actually think that it's writing,
Mhm.
that writing is the main task, which in many cases it is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I recently taught a 4-hour course on grant writing and AI at a local AFP conference, and I asked, and several people in the room had tried different grant writing tools. I won't name them. There's about a dozen that I can name off the top of my head, and everyone in the room who had been grant writing for at least a couple of years said they were garbage. The only person, and I actually had a side conversation with this person because I was curious why they liked it, finding out they don't have any grant writing training. They're a development professional wearing lots of hats and they had never done grant writing before they used the tool. So I think the takeaway there is companies are over promising and under delivering on what their tools can actually do for you at a high level of quality. AI feels like magic when you hate staring at a blank page because it sure is going to put words on a page and it's going to do it fast and it's going to feel magical. And for those of us who have been in the field for a while, we can very quickly spot the gaps that an AI is going to create in a grant when it is not fed proper instructions or context or what have you. And I do think there are ways to manipulate it to make it work for you. And I do that with clients. Like that is it is possible. And most of the tools out there are just a wrapper on an existing LLM. So if you don't know that you have to provide it tons of context, if you provide it bad context, right? If you provide it information from last year, you haven't updated the numbers, it's going to give you last year's numbers. But a lot of people don't even understand how the AI is working in the first place or how to manipulate it. And so a lot of these tools, whether it's we're going to write your federal grant for $1,500 or it's instrumental who now has rolled out a writing side or it's any of the other ones, they're not there. So those of us who are experts, those of us who are grant professionals who care a lot about this stuff, we're pretty much shaking our heads across the board. And again, I think this is where things can get a little bit tricky for organizations that are lower capacity or new grant writers who haven't taken much training and are jumping into this and saying, okay, AI is going to be my assistant. AI is going to teach me how to write grants. AI is going to teach me how to build a consulting business. And suddenly our field is full of consultants who learn to write grants from AI, are using AI to write their grants, and they're turning out trash.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just also uh the again, like the writing part is the best part of it, in my opinion, under the whole umbrella of grant work. I don't know that I mean, I suppose from the grant management point of view, I don't know. I'm not really overly familiar with any AI that's being heavily used on that front. I mean, besides like writing the reports or something, but so if there are any, I'd be very curious to know if folks have had any experience with any AI that's promising to help manage grants. But as far as like the other parts of grant work, I mean, it's definitely not doing your funder cultivation, which is the biggest piece of grant work, right? It's also not doing again, the prospecting to me, it's doing the most poorly, because it's always convinced that if there's any overlap between that funder and your project or your org, it's like, here, this is perfect. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. And it does not have the nuance of what is a good fit with a funder. And I do think, Kelly's asking again, what does work for you with AI, which I think is back to kind of the first thing of, I want to end this on what are your effective uh, cases that you have for us. But really quickly before we get into that, I just want to see, Kelly, Emily asked, what was the 990 visualization tool that you were referencing earlier that you've used?
Right, and that was instrumental. I put
Oh,
a
that
note in
wasn't, oh, sorry, you were answering her question
They're
with that.
terrible.
Oh, okay.
They're terrible designers. They're not very good product people. It's clunky and it's expensive. It's a little overpriced. But it's still very useful.
And
I mean, it's still super useful.
I think
And they're just
FDO Foundation Directory Online also has some 990 visualization tools. I don't think it goes through as many different categories as Instrumental. Like, I don't think it does like what percent are new funders and things. But what I like about Foundation Directory Online is it actually will bring you down to a county level in states like California. It doesn't matter if they fund in California, if all that funding is happening in Southern
Yeah,
California.
they do county and county does instrument. I haven't used
Oh, it
Foundation Center
does?
in a while.
The last time I used it, I thought it only went to a state level.
I don't know how deep the
In the
analysis is.
visualization, I mean, I think it only went to a state level.
Oh, the visualization only
Yeah.
goes to state, but you can search. Yeah.
Yeah, it just is, that's extra work.
And the
But
trick I
yeah, so
would
I think a
say,
couple of them, Emily, use visualization for the 990s.
and the trick with instrumental, and maybe this is true with FDO as well, Melody, but FDO, I know a lot of people can get through their library systems. It's also very expensive. But instrumental, I share my account. So I have
Yeah.
another consultant who was like, I can't afford it anymore. And I was like, I have 4 free spots on mine for
Oh.
projects I'm not using. And so she just pays me for 4 spots. And we just kind of split the cost 40/60 on my
Yes.
10 spots. So they're pretty flexible with that. She had her own account. They helped migrate it all over into my
Oh,
account.
good.
So keep that in mind if you want to split it with
Yeah.
someone who maybe doesn't need all theirs.
Which is I'm doing as well. And so yeah, so when I actually have anyway, at this point I have enough people, I might go up to the next level where everything's segregated. But yeah, if
Yeah.
someone's looking to split it, you can you could ping me. Uh
Well, I
but yeah,
would love to hear Fielding, the
Yeah.
positive. What are the positive uses of AI in the grant world these
Yeah.
days?
So I think my favorite use case so far is creating summaries of federal funding opportunity announcements. So RFP, NOFO, instructions, whatever you want to call them, they're often 100 pages long. And the way that I work with clients, there are really 2 ways that I do federal grant writing with clients. And one of those ways is that they just call me and they're like, oh my God, this thing dropped. It's due in 6 weeks. Can you help us write it? And that's the email I get. We're not under contract. I don't know the funding opportunity, right? So, what AI now allows, so let me tell you what I used to do. I used to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours prepping for a sales call with no signed contract because I had to read the entire NOFO because I don't want to sign a contract with an organization that it has no chance of getting the money. I love my win rate and I want to protect it. And I also don't want nonprofits to waste their resources writing a grant they aren't going to be eligible for and can't get. So I need to go into that conversation and do a deep assessment of their capabilities and alignment with this funding opportunity. And the funding opportunity is 100 pages long, right? And the challenge of federal RFPs is often that there is one line on one page that maybe seems like it should be in a different section, but it's not, and it's hidden, and it's like you must be a blank in order to come after this money. and that won't be in the eligibility criteria section, right? And so I really did have to read 80 to 90% of that NOFO in order just to have the call. So I'm not paid for any of this, right? I didn't charge for this part of the process. Yes, once they sign a contract, that cost is built into their contract and it's fine. Now, what I've done is I've trained a custom GPT to the point to give me exactly the set of information I think I need to have that call. So this was irrelevant for most of the year because there were no federal opportunities coming out. And then a couple of weeks ago, I get that email that's like, "Hey, Fielding, connect to you because you're the best," and blah 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 blah, and they need you to write this grant. And so I said, and I was like, I'm just going to see if this works. I said, I'm available right now. This grant was due in 3 weeks, right? I was like, I'm available right now. Let's get on this call. I literally drag and dropped that RFP into my custom GPT. I got the exact outline that I needed because I have trained this, right? I have given it exactly the information I need. I have identified tons of red flags that it will return for me so that I know what I'm talking about on the call. And I trust it because I have done this so many times. Now, could it give me bad information? Yes. Also, the client's getting this for free. So we can talk about that. But I have run this enough times that I do trust it. So I get on the call and I say to the potential client, I used AI to create an outline. I have not read this RFP. What we're going to talk about today, I truly believe is what we need to talk about. But I'm just letting you know, I've used AI and there could be something incorrect in here. So we have a 30-minute conversation. In that time period, I can also, because I've included a request for citations for page numbers, I can click on those and double check things as we're going through. So what I've been able to do is reduce that. And in that conversation, we decided it was a no-go, right? I mean, that was the result of the call, was like, we're not going to do this. So instead of spending 2 hours of my time to not get a contract, I spent 30 minutes with the client to not get a contract. They felt great leaving the conversation. They felt like we had made collectively the correct decision. And I didn't spend 2 hours getting there, right? And so to me, the best solutions are places where there is a lot of time being spent with a high opportunity cost. And so figuring out what those places are in your own workflow, like where do you have uncompensated time? Where do you have an activity that takes a lot of time, but there's just not a lot of value, so to speak, in the process itself? Identifying those for yourself and then using what you know about AI to build a tool to fix that problem, I think is the right approach. And so one of the things I've been training a lot about is like, there's really a 3 or maybe 4 part, there are 4 variables that we can play with in AI. So there's just too much, frankly, information about prompt writing, right? There's like, I have the perfect prompt and here it is and whatever, right? So there's a lot of information out there on prompting, but I don't think that's the most important part. The most important part are the instructions you give to AI, which could be a part of your prompt, but are often left out. So you need instructions, and then you also need context or knowledge for your AI, right? If you give it context and knowledge, you're already 100 times better off than you were before you provided that. So whether you're doing that, in a custom GPT or a project or just in sort of your open framework, and then the 4th variable is the model you're using, right? So whether it's a thinking model or it's kind of the base model, a research model, like what is the model you need to use? And knowing how to use these things is important when we talk about ethics and sustainability, right? Because like turning yourself into a Care Bear and putting it in plastic wrap, like that's incredibly resource intensive and has 0 value for the world. Sorry if anyone's done that. But that's the truth. And so like a thinking model might be really important to use for a particular type of prompt, but it also is resource intensive. So if you're using thinking models all the time, that's also not the direction we want to go in, right? And so this is why I'm such a proponent of like, we need to understand how these models work. We need to understand what we need to give it in order to get that quality, because if we're just banging on our keyboard 15 different prompts trying to get it to do a thing, that's a waste. The fourth is the prompt. So what are you actually asking AI to do? So let me give you an example. So I create custom, I call them AI assistants, grant writing assistants. And so within a project, the instructions are how do you write grants? So in 8,000 characters, which is the cap, I tell AI how to write a grant. The context knowledge would be documents you are likely to look at while you are writing a grant if you are a human grant writer and you upload those in. And then the prompt is just the interaction with that ecosystem, if you will. So once all that's loaded, someone could say, we want to write a grant to XYZ Foundation. Here's the link to the funding opportunity. And we think we want to write about the ABC program. Give me a draft. And then the model, which is the fourth variable, again, you can use sort of the base model, which up until recently in ChatGPT was 4.0. Now we're up to 5.0, which is endlessly confusing, and we could have a whole different conversation about that. But they also had the 3.3.0. And that was their thinking model, and now those have been condensed into 5.0. But knowing the model type, so whether it's a deep research type thing, whether it, and then again, like the different models. So if you're using Copilot, I'm sorry, it's useless. But like Gemini, you might only use if you're also in Google, right? Like there'd be no real other reason to use it. You could use Claude, and there are reasons you might want to use Claude. And then there's ChatGPT, right? So there's a lot of different options, truly. But I think picking one LLM and then really understanding the four dimensions of that AI and understanding how to use them and manipulating those, I think is the trick to using AI.
That's super
Well,
helpful. Thank you, Fielding.
Yeah.
we have about 5 more minutes. Any other case study use that you want to throw out there?
I think one place I do occasionally use AI that so here's an example. So for years, I would collect regional reports for my clients, right? It would be like, oh, the health department just came out with their community needs assessment, right? Or somebody paid the Rand Corporation to come in and write a report on whatever. And I would often know I had the data, but it would take me a long time to find it. So I've also created like a St. Louis um, uh, needs data repository, and now I can ask that particular custom GPT to give me everything it has on taking something that there isn't a lot, let's say transgender youth health disparities, right? Like it's hard to find that data just by like Googling. It's often deep in one report and there's one or two data points and it's not a whole subsection, right? So it's hard to find, but I can put that in there. And the way that I have it trained is that it will return both the statistic along with the citation. So I can go back to that thing if I need to. And then it's really easy to swap that stuff out. So at each year, I'll be able to go in and remove anything that's more than 3 years old, add all the new things that I found. And it just helps kind of keep track of all of these different data points that I reference regularly for clients. So it's kind of fun for that purpose as well. The other thing I want to just pose to the group would be if there are other topics, and Melody, I heard grants management. So, and I have someone I think I could invite to this to talk about grants management and AI. But if others have questions or topics that you'd want to delve into on the next call, we're happy to kind of find folks who we think would have something to say about it, but are also just open to holding space for a topic that feels heavy and we need to talk about as a group of grant professionals. And then Melody also just dropped the invite for next month's call.
Yep, September 10th, same time, same place. Oh, I mean, it'll be a different Zoom link, but it'll be in Zoom. Uh, yeah, yeah. I think I was looking too because um Philip Deng sent us this little quote. I think earlier in the chat, Kelly, I think you said AI is a tool. And if you don't know Philip, what's his company again? Grantable?
Grantable.
Grantable, which is an AI, one of the grant focused AI softwares out there. And he says that he agrees that AI is not a tool, it's an agent. It makes decisions, it learns, it comes up with ideas. And I think we often say, well, AI is a tool, it's about how you use it. And I don't know that it's a tool, right? I think it's a different thing than a tool. I feel
I
like.
like to call it a tool of tools. I like to call it a tool of tools. It feels like a platform to me. It feels like a builder space. And I am curious to have this conversation with Philip because
Yeah.
I think we get to choose. Like I think that's the point. Like to me, the scariness of this space is that we have to actively choose. And that's what's scary because humans aren't great at collectively choosing to do something that is ethical, right? And so how do we choose the ethical approach to this? And part of that, I think, is it is not an agent. We do not allow it to take human work. And I think that's something a phrase I think I picked up from you, Melody, right? Like there is human work that is happening and it is important. And when we hand that over to AI, that is absolutely the biggest liability.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know that I agree that it is an agent. I worry that it's handed the reins over of an agent. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we do have to be mindful. I think we miss something big when we reduce it to just being a tool. It's much bigger than a tool right now in our world. It is everywhere too. My spatula is not getting all up in my emails. A spatula is a tool that I get to control. I do not have control over this being in my life, right? Anyways, all right. Well, thank you everybody so much. So wonderful to have all these discussions and keeping this, subject kind of front and center for everyone. And I hope to see you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.